He was a millionaire CEO looking to expand his real estate empire. She was a 14-year-old girl hiding in the shadows of a forgotten warehouse. He thought he was buying empty property. Instead, he found two little girls sewing in silence, exhausted, trembling, and very much alone. Why were they there? Where were their parents? And what kind of world forces a child to become the adult in her own life? What began as a routine business deal would unravel a chain of secrets buried deep beneath concrete floors and corporate lies. And the man who once counted profits would soon find himself counting the quiet breaths of two sisters who had never known safety. Until now. But what does it mean to rescue someone when the system built to protect them was the very one that failed them? This is not just a story of tragedy. It's a story of power, redemption, and the courage it takes to finally say, we deserve better. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more true-to-life stories that make you feel and think. Now, let's begin. The lock clicked louder than it should have in the silence. Grant Ellison paused with the key still in the iron door of the old garment warehouse, his breath curling in the early morning chill. St. Paul was unusually quiet at that hour just after 6, before the noise of city life woke up and started filling in the gaps. He'd been here before, of course, several times, but today was different. Today the deed was signed. Today, this building, the crumbling, brick-faced factory that used to stitch dreams into uniforms, belonged to him. It was another acquisition, another broken thing to flip. Grant wore a black wool coat, simple but clearly custom. The shoulders sitting just right on a man who measured everything: space, cost, value, risk. He didn't flinch at the sharp snap of cold air through a broken window as he stepped inside. Dust, silence, and rust greeted him like old friends. He walked down the main corridor slowly, boots clicking on warped concrete, the high windows stained with the memory of industry. Rusted sewing tables, thread spools, and piles of fabric scraps still sat where workers once labored. The last company here had gone under during the recession. Nothing had moved since. It was just what he wanted. Dead things sold cheap. And Grant Ellison knew how to raise the dead. He stopped to survey the west wing of the factory floor. 10,000 square feet. Clear ceiling height. Could be co-working space or boutique storage with the right upgrades. He made a mental note to call his contractor. Then he heard it. A soft, mechanical sound. Whirring, like stitching. He tilted his head. There it was again. A low hum, rhythmic. Not the wind. Not the building settling. Too steady for a rodent or raccoon. Grant frowned and followed the sound. Past the break room, around a corner, down a hallway marked no access. The sound was coming from the basement. There shouldn't be a basement, but there was. He found a narrow stairwell steel, old, slick with condensation. With each step down, the hum grew louder. When he reached the bottom, he froze. There, under a single hanging bulb in the corner of the basement, sat two girls, sewing, real machines, plugged into God knows what outlet. The older one couldn't have been more than 10. Dark hair, pulled back into a tight ponytail. Her small hands guided fabric beneath a mechanical foot with precision Grant hadn't seen in years. The younger girl, maybe 6, sat beside her, stitching by hand and softly humming to herself. Grant stood motionless. The basement was cold, unfinished, with bare brick and cement. There were piles of navy blue fabric folded neatly into stacks, a chalkboard with measurements written in careful block letters, and a plastic bin labeled "Payment Due Friday." The older girl looked up. She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or scream or apologize. She simply stared. Her eyes were sharp, deep gray, calm like still water before a storm. Grant took a step forward. His voice cracked louder than expected. "What are you doing here?" The younger girl dropped her needle, startled, but the older one didn't move. "We're working," she said. "You broke in." "No." She stood up now, her chin high. "We came in through the loading dock. The latch was broken. You shouldn't be here. This place is condemned. We've been coming here for months." Grant blinked. "Months." She nodded. "We sew uniforms for Ms. Hallbridge at Eastbury Elementary. She gives us designs, fabric, and pays us when we deliver them on time." Grant shook his head, more confused than angry. "That's not legal." The younger girl spoke for the first time, voice barely above a whisper. "But it's real." He looked at them, really looked. Their hands were red and dry. Their clothes were clean but worn. There was a thermos beside them, 2 plastic bowls, and a notebook that looked like an order ledger. Grant turned toward the stairs, like he could leave this scene behind and pretend it never happened. But the older girl's voice stopped him cold. "Our mom is sick," she said, plainly. No tears, no begging, just fact. She can't work. She can't walk much either. The free clinic gave her some antibiotics, but they aren't helping. The younger girl hugged her knees. "My name is Emery," the older one added. "That's Joni." Grant cleared his throat. "How old are you?" "Then she's 6. He pulled his wallet out of his coat and took out a $100 bill. "Take this," he said. "Go home, and don't come back. I'm locking this place down by tomorrow." Emery didn't move. "We can't just leave," she said softly. "We have 12 orders left. If we don't finish, we don't get paid. You're children. Children don't have contracts." "We do," Emery said. "It's just not on paper." Grant felt the silence stretch between them like thread pulled too tight. Something about the girl's voice firm, matter of fact, adult in a way that no child should ever be stirred, something in him. He had been this age once, alone in a silent house, microwaving mac and cheese while the world passed outside. Joni sneezed. Her fingers trembled. Grant looked at the fraying sleeves of her sweater. He shoved the money back into his wallet and stepped away. "I'm calling my contractor," he said. "The loading dock gets sealed tonight." Emery said nothing, but as he turned to leave, he heard her voice again, quiet, not angry, not pleading, just tired. "It's safer here than home." The next morning, Grant sat at the corner window of his penthouse, untouched coffee cooling in front of him. He didn't usually linger like this. His days were precise, booked in blocks meetings, forecasts, site visits, acquisitions. But today, the image wouldn't leave him. That dim basement, those tiny hands on industrial machines, the look in the older girl's eyes. What was her name? Emery. She hadn't flinched when he spoke. She had stared straight into him, calm and worn, like a person who had learned too early that the world wouldn't save her unless she fought tooth and nail for herself. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror, when he was 9. He tried to focus on his tablet review the profit margins from the last 3 acquisitions. They were good, better than expected. His name had started showing up in profiles again, the turnaround architect. That's what Investors Digest called him. But all he could think about was Emery, turning down a $100 bill like it meant nothing. Not out of pride, out of duty. She had a job to do. That afternoon, curiosity overrode reason. He told his driver to take him back to the warehouse. He didn't even know what he planned to say. Maybe to make sure they were gone. Maybe to see if they weren't. The contractor, Leon, met him at the entrance, clipboard in hand. "Sir, we sealed the loading dock, replaced the old hinges, and welded the basement stair gate shut exactly as you said. No way in now." Grant nodded. "Good." He hesitated. And the girls, Leon asked carefully. They didn't, come back. I don't know, Grant said. But if they do, call me. Not the cops? Leon raised an eyebrow but said nothing. That night, Grant barely slept. Something was wrong. And it wasn't just moral, it was personal. Familiar in a way he didn't want to admit. He remembered what it was like to be invisible. To be in a world where the adults had their own problems and the children were expected to survive on scraps. At 6 a.m. The next morning, Grant's phone rang. It was Leon. Boss, they're back, or he hurt. 20 minutes later, Grant stood at the edge of the basement again. The girls had found a way in through a loose board behind the east wall. Old security flaw no one had thought to check. But it wasn't just that they'd returned. They'd made the place better. They had set up their machines with precision. Extension cords carefully looped overhead to avoid trip hazards. Fabrics measured and marked with tailor's chalk. And a small LED lamp hung from a coat hook for extra lighting. A thermos of soup steamed gently on an overturned crate. A cardboard sign read, "Do not touch deliveries ready." They'd even swept the floor. He watched from the shadows, unseen. Emery was working with sharp focus, her posture exact. Joni sat across from her, hand-sewing buttons onto what looked like navy blue school blazers. Her lips moved with a quiet tune only she could hear. Grant stepped forward. This time, they didn't jump. "You sealed the door," Emery said, not looking up. "So we found the side panel." "You shouldn't be here," he said. "This place is dangerous." Joni's face twisted with worry. "Are you going to make us stop?" Grant sighed. "I'm not the bad guy." "Then why do you act like one?" Emery said evenly. He said nothing. She finally set her machine to rest and stood. Her hair was frizzed from the cold. Her sleeves rolled tight to the elbow. She looked like a child, but stood like a manager. "You don't understand," she said. "My mom needs real medicine, not cough syrup from the free clinic. Pills that actually work. But we don't have insurance, and no one will hire a sick woman or a 10-year-old. "Where's your father?" Emery looked away. "Dead. His name was Paul. He worked construction. Heat stroke." Grant pressed his lips into a line. "I'm sorry." Emery nodded, like she'd heard that phrase 1,000 times and stopped knowing what to do with it. "I'm trying to keep Joni in school, and keep Mom warm, and keep the landlord from knocking. We're only 3 uniforms short. Then we get paid. Ms. Halbridge always pays on time." Joni chimed in quietly. "She even gave us mittens last month." Grant glanced around again. These weren't hobby projects. They were real. Professional-level seams, tight hems, lined collars. Better than most retail he'd seen. "How did you learn to sew like this?" Emery's expression softened just slightly. "Mom worked in the garment district for 12 years. She used to work here, before it closed. She taught me everything." Grant's throat felt tight. He'd forgotten this building had once been part of a thriving sector before his firm bought it, stripped it, and let it rot. "She always said fabric listens." Emery said, "That thread follows your intention, that you have to feel where it wants to go, not force it." That line, Grant had heard it before. Somewhere, a memory flickered at the edge of consciousness. A woman saying something like that. But it vanished before he could catch it. He cleared his throat. "Even if you finish those uniforms, this isn't safe. I'm locking this place down for good." Emery looked at him. Those gray eyes weren't angry. They were exhausted. "We know," she said. Grant hesitated. He didn't have children, didn't want them. He had investment portfolios, equity plays, silent partners. But now, he didn't have a protocol for this. He turned to leave again, and this time, it was Joni who spoke. Do Do you think there's a place where kids don't have to do all the grown-up stuff?" Grant stopped. His voice cracked before he meant it to. "I don't know." And for the first time in years, that answer frightened him. Grant didn't follow them right away. He told himself it was inappropriate, possibly illegal, probably unethical. But by the third night, he was back in his car. The cold was biting as he parked down the block from the warehouse and waited. Headlights off, engine low. At exactly 7 p.m. he saw them. Emery exited through the same loose panel she'd mentioned before. She had Joni's hand in hers, and a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Her breath came out in white clouds, but her stride didn't waver. They didn't see him. Grant followed at a slow crawl, stand back just enough not to be noticed. They walked through a side alley, cut across a snow-covered lot, then through an old park where the swing chains creaked in the wind. They moved like they'd done this path 100 times. Maybe they had. And then they turned onto Walnut Avenue. Grant's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. The name shouldn't have meant anything. It was just a street. But as they passed a shuttered laundromat and a crumbling brick storefront with hand-painted signs, something twisted in his chest. This wasn't just any street. He had lived here 30 years ago. Apartment 2C, the place with the sagging porch and the tiny window with broken blinds. He remembered the smell of wet insulation and old carpet, the thin walls that let every neighbor's argument slip into his bedroom at night. He hadn't driven down this street since the day he left it behind for good. And now here he was, watching 2 little girls vanish into a yellow house with peeling white shutters. The number 109 stenciled crookedly on the mailbox. He parked across the street. For a while, he didn't move. The house was old, but maintained. A small garden, long dead from the frost, sat to the left of the front steps. A faded chalk drawing of a butterfly was still visible near the door. Christmas lights drooped along the gutters, though they didn't seem to be plugged in. From a nearby porch, a woman's voice broke the silence. "You're not very good at surveillance, you know." Grant startled. A woman in her 70s stood just beyond his driver's side window, her coat pristine, her silver hair wrapped in a perfect twist. She tapped the window with a gloved hand. He rolled it down halfway. "Excuse me, you've been out here 2 nights now," she said matter-of-factly. "Don't worry. I'm not calling the police. I'm curious." He hesitated. "I work in real estate. That house." She waved him off. "Save it. I know the girls. Emery and Joni. Sweet kids. Their mama, Sabrina, isn't doing so well." Her tone changed. Just slightly. She barely leaves her bed these days. Depression. Maybe worse. She used to be lovely, fierce, full of fire. Now she's a ghost. The woman extended her hand through the window. "Carolyn Dobbins. I live right across the street. That white colonial with the iron gate." Grant shook her hand, the cold metal of her rings biting his skin. "And you are." He gave her the name slowly. "Grant Ellison." Recognition flashed in her eyes, though she said nothing. "I'm just concerned," she said, eyes drifting back to the yellow house. 2 little girls raising themselves. "It's not right." She leaned closer. "I've thought about calling someone. Social services. It might be for the best. Children need structure, stability. That house, it's fallen apart." Grant's eyes narrowed. "You want their house." Carolyn's smile faltered for half a breath. "I want what's best for the neighborhood. That property's undervalued. With the right touch, it could be something special. Bed and breakfast, maybe. Or a wellness retreat." Grant said nothing. Just then, the front door opened. Emery stepped out with a grocery bag in her arms. She locked the door carefully, checked it twice, then walked briskly toward the corner market, eyes scanning the street. When she noticed Grant's car, she slowed. Their eyes met. She didn't look scared. She looked resigned, like she expected people to watch, to judge, to show up and leave again. Grant looked down, then back at Carolyn. "I think I'll go now." Carolyn nodded, her voice like velvet over steel. "Of course. I just hope someone does right by those girls, before the wrong people do." As he pulled away, Grant's thoughts raced. Something about the woman bothered him. The way she smiled too much, knew too much. He had met people like her before, polished, strategic, calculated. But what chilled him most was the truth in her tone. There were systems waiting to claim kids like Emery and Joni, and people like Carolyn Dobbins weren't just watching them. They were circling. Later that night, Grant sat alone in his living room, lights dim, a glass of bourbon untouched beside him. He opened his laptop, searched city records for Sabrina Vega. The database was sluggish, but her name popped up. Rental agreement, medical aid applications, unpaid utility notices, and a record from Ellison Green Holdings, his own company. 12 years ago, her name appeared as a seamstress during their acquisition of Midtown Garment Corp. She had been on a list of workers laid off when operations were shut down. He stared at the record. She had worked for him. He hadn't known, or hadn't cared. Grant rubbed his eyes, heart pounding in a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. What were the odds? What were the odds that the little girl with the storm-colored eyes, the one fighting to sew her way through survival, had once played under her mother's workstation while the building she worked in was dismantled by people like him? No, by him. The past had a way of showing up when you least expected it, and sometimes it showed up in the eyes of a child holding everything together. The next time Grant saw Carolyn Dobbins, she was pruning her roses. It was early Saturday morning. Frost still clung to the fence rails, but Carolyn's garden was immaculate unnaturally. So for midwinter and Saint Fall, every hedge trimmed, each rose bush wrapped in burlap like it had never heard of hardship. Grant had parked down the street and walked toward the yellow house on Walnut, intending to knock, maybe talk to Sabrina, maybe even offer help. He didn't have a script, only a feeling, one he'd avoided his entire adult life. But Carolyn saw him first. Back again. She called brightly, snipping a perfectly red bloom from its stem. You do make a habit of circling what you can't quite claim. Grant stopped cold. She wore a cream trench coat and leather gloves. Her posture relaxed, but her eyes held a glint sharper than her gardening shears. "I'm not circling anything," Grant replied flatly. "I'm checking on someone." She tapped the shears against her palm. The girls, of course, sweet things. A little too independent, if you ask me. He narrowed his gaze. "What are you trying to do?" "Carolyn, I'm not trying anything. Mr. Ellison, I'm concerned, that's all." Her voice was sugar, but the sweetness had a bitter aftertaste. Children raising children. A mother who can't hold down a job. A house that barely qualifies as habitable. Wouldn't you be concerned? I'm more concerned about who benefits from their downfall. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, she smiled. Their house sits on a corner lot. Great visibility. Walking distance from the river and the new green line stop. Once that shelter across the street shuts down, this block will rise. And when it does, someone has to ensure it rises the right way. And you think you're that someone? Carolyn stepped closer, her heels crunching lightly in the frost-dusted gravel. I have vision, Mr. Ellison, and connections. With the right developer, I could turn this whole block into a boutique experience. Coffee shops, short-term rentals, art galleries, and where do Emery and Joni fit into that experience? He asked. Carolyn tilted her head. Where they belong. in homes with structure, with rules, with adults who don't leave them unsupervised for days while their mother wastes away upstairs. The accusation slammed into Grant like a brick. You've been watching them. I've been documenting. The word hung in the air, heavy as a threat. She pulled something from the pocket of her coat, a small folder, neat and sealed. I've already contacted child welfare, not out of malice, out of civic duty. He stepped closer, voice low and hard. What you're doing isn't civic. It's predatory. Carolyn didn't back down. I'm ensuring those girls get what they actually need. And if that frees up property for people who will appreciate its value, well, 2 birds, 1 stone. Grant clenched his jaw. You're using children to leverage real estate. I'm preventing children from becoming another news story, she countered. Besides, if you care so much, why haven't you done anything? That stopped him. It wasn't an accusation, it was a challenge. And worse, it was partially true. He'd watched, investigated, followed. But what had he changed? Nothing. He didn't respond. Carolyn smiled again. Thought so. She turned, gathering her tools, her back to him as casually as if they'd discussed the weather. You can stand out here as long as you want. Mr. Ellison, she said over her shoulder, but the process has already begun. When the state reviews custody placement, they won't care about what you feel. They'll care about paperwork, evidence, history. Grant's voice was quiet but dangerous. If you touch those girls' lives again, you'll regret it. Carolyn didn't even pause. I'm not the one who left a little girl sewing uniforms in a condemned basement, and with that, she disappeared behind her gate. If that's still on her. Grant didn't knock on the yellow house's door that day. He couldn't. Not like that. Not while shaking with the fury of all the times he'd watched adults circle wounded kids like vultures. Instead, he got in his car and drove. Not back to his penthouse. Not to the firm. He drove 2 hours north, to a lake cabin he hadn't visited in over a year. A place he bought with the fantasy of escaping but never used. No Wi-Fi, just wood walls, a rusted heater, and the silence he used to find soothing. He stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold before it even touched his lips. Then he opened his laptop. He pulled up county records, then DCFS protocols, looked up housing policy, real estate transfer histories, legal guardianship procedures, and finally, the name he'd been avoiding, Sabrina Vega. She had applied for medical relief 3 times, denied all 3. She had no living relatives, no husband, no employer, no allies, except 2 small girls who were about to be stripped from the only world they knew. Grant closed the laptop and stared out at the lake, its frozen surface catching the late afternoon sun like glass. He remembered sleeping on a mattress on the floor, remembered counting quarters in a jar so his mother could buy groceries, remembered the caseworker who smiled as he packed his 1 suitcase, telling him the placement would only be for a week. 2 years later, no one had ever come back. He'd promised himself then, no one would ever decide his life for him again. But now he saw those same patterns lining up again, but this time not for him. For Emery, for Joni. They didn't even know the storm was coming. And maybe, just maybe, that was why he had to be the one to stand in its way. The storm hit faster than anyone expected. It rolled over Saint, fall like a living thing. Snow turning to sleet, sleet turning to jagged hail, trees bowing in submission as the wind howled between buildings, like it was searching for something. Grant had been home for less than an hour when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. It was late. He was halfway through an untouched dinner, flipping mindlessly through financial reports he couldn't focus on. But when he saw the name flash on the screen, Davis, the private security consultant he'd quietly hired to keep an eye on the yellow house he picked up immediately. "Mr. Ellison," Davis said, breathless, "you need to come." Now, Grant was already on his feet. "What happened?" "Ambulance just left. The mother, Sabrina, collapsed. The girls are still in the house. Power's out. I tried to get them to come with me, but Emery's panicking about water coming through the roof. She won't leave." Grant didn't even hang up. He grabbed his coat, keys, wallet, and was in his car before the rest of the words could land. By the time he reached Walnut Avenue, branches littered the roads like bones. Streetlights flickered. A power transformer had blown somewhere south, plunging the block into a sticky, unlit darkness. Emergency vehicles were gone. The yellow house sat in near silhouette, the front door half open, wind tearing at its loose screen. Inside, it was chaos. Buckets on the floor, water pouring through a section of ceiling that had given way. Drenched towels spread across hardwood already warped from the moisture. A faint gas smell from the old furnace trying to restart itself. And in the center of it all, Emery, kneeling beside Joni, who lay on a couch soaked through with cold. "Emery," Grant's voice cut through the storm, and she looked up. Her eyes were red, her cheeks blotched. Her jacket was dripping, hair slicked to her forehead. "She has a fever," Emery croaked. "I tried the medicine, but she's not getting better. And Mom couldn't breathe. They took her. I don't even know where." Joni whimpered, her eyes glassy. Grant dropped beside them, feeling Joni's forehead, burning. "She needs a doctor now." "I don't have insurance cards," Emery began. "I do," he said firmly. Emery stared at him. "You're not family. Right now," he said, scooping Jonah into his arms. "I'm the person who showed up." She didn't argue. She only grabbed the canvas bag near the door and followed him through the storm. The ER receptionist barely looked up when they walked in until Grant dropped his black card on the counter and said, "Private billing. Immediate care." Suddenly, doors opened. Nurses appeared. Vitals were taken. IVs were started. And Joni was whisked away to pediatrics, her small body limp against the stretcher, her fingers still clutching a piece of Emery's jacket. Grant sat in the waiting room, soaked to the skin. Emery sat beside him, motionless. She hadn't spoken since they left the house. Her hands were clenched into fists in her lap, knuckles wide. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft he almost didn't hear it. "I tried." He looked at her. "What?" "I tried to take care of everything. I cooked. I cleaned. I learned how to sew when I was 6. I watched YouTube videos on how to fix plumbing. I paid bills with tips. I walked Joni to school. I checked homework. I cut coupons." Her voice cracked. "But I'm not big enough." And then, for the first time since he met her, Emery Vega cried, not quietly, not a single tear, but a whole body collapse into sobs that racked her thin shoulders, that made strangers in the waiting room glance away. She cried into Grant's coat, and he wrapped his arms around her like someone anchoring a shipwreck. He didn't say you'll be fine. He didn't say you're strong. She already knew those lies too well. Instead, he whispered the only truth that mattered. You shouldn't have to be. They stayed overnight. Joni was admitted for severe dehydration and strep throat. She would be fine, the nurse assured them. But she needed rest, warmth, antibiotics, and consistency. Emery didn't sleep. She sat by the hospital bed and stroked her sister's hair in long, quiet motions until sunrise. Grant made 3 calls, one to his lawyer, one to his assistant, asking for an emergency contractor to inspect the yellow house by noon, and one to a woman named Monica, a pediatric caseworker he knew from a past donation event. He didn't use favors often. But this wasn't business. It was the beginning of something else. Hey, dad, at 8, doze. As daylight broke through the hospital windows, Emery sat on the edge of a plastic chair, eyes rimmed red but dry. Grant handed her a cup of warm cocoa the nurse had brought. I can take you both back to my place for a few days, he said. She didn't answer. He tried again. You can stay as long as you need, until your mom's out of the hospital, or longer. Finally, she looked up. What if I mess up again? You didn't mess up. I let the roof leak. I let Joni get sick. He shook his head. You carried your family on your back for years. That's not a mistake. That's a miracle. Emery said nothing, but her shoulders dropped just slightly, the smallest flicker of belief taking root. In that moment, Grant knew they were past the line now. This wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was responsibility. And once you stepped into the storm for someone else, you didn't get to walk away dry. The first thing Emery noticed was the silence, not the comforting kind, not the kind you sink into like a soft bed. No, this was the kind of silence that echoed, that made your ears feel too sharp and the air feel too big. Grant's penthouse was beautiful, tall windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, modern lighting that adjusted itself depending on the time of day, and furniture so soft it made Emery suspicious. Joni, on the other hand, was delighted. She'd been discharged that morning, still a little tired, but with more color in her cheeks. As soon as she stepped inside, she gasped. Hey, look at the couch. It's like a cloud. Emery gave a small smile, but didn't say much. She was used to reading rooms, not reacting to them. She watched Grant walk through the kitchen with practiced ease, like this space had never surprised him, never once been out of his control. He showed them the guest room, the bathroom, the balcony. She noticed how everything smelled faintly of cedar and lemon, but nothing felt real. No dishes in the sink, no chipped mugs, no socks draped over the radiator to dry. Just quiet perfection. Later, when Joni curled up in the guest bed and drifted to sleep, Emery sat alone on the couch, knees tucked to her chest, watching lights flicker on in the skyline below. Grant returned from a phone call, setting a folder on the coffee table. I had my lawyer start looking into your mom's medical situation, he said softly. They moved her to a better facility. Private room, more stable care. Emery nodded. Thank you. He hesitated before sitting across from her. You can stay here as long as you need. She glanced at him. You keep saying that because it's true. What do you want in return? The question landed like a stone between them. Grant leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Nothing. Her expression didn't change, but he saw the flicker in her eyes. People don't just help, she said. They ask. Later, if not now, he swallowed. I did that once. I watched someone wait for help until it was too late. She studied him. Was it your mom? He blinked. She tilted her head. You look like someone who used to eat cereal for dinner and sleep with one ear open. He exhaled. A short, surprised laugh. You're good at this. I had to be. They sat in silence for a moment. Grant spoke first. I know it feels weird, being somewhere safe. I don't trust it yet. You don't have to. She turned to the window again. It's too quiet here. At home, the faucet drips. The neighbor's TV hums through the walls. Joni talks in her sleep. I can hear everything. I know everything. Grant nodded. Control. She met his eyes. Yeah, I used to need that too. Still do. He stood and walked to the kitchen. A few seconds later, he returned with two mismatched mugs, one filled with hot chocolate, the other with warm milk. These don't match your kitchen, she said. He smiled. They don't, but they were my mom's. The last two things I kept. She took the chocolate. They sat again. This time, the silence wasn't empty. His stare. The days passed slower than Emery expected. Joni adjusted fast, she always did. She started leaving her socks in the hallway, asking Alexa to play silly music, and coloring with crayons she found in the guest desk drawer. But Emery stayed cautious. Every night, she folded her clothes neatly on the chair. She memorized the fire exits. She checked the locks twice. She still didn't trust warmth, didn't trust comfort, because those were the first things people took from you when they left. Grant noticed, but didn't push. Instead, he made space. He began leaving breakfast out, then retreating to his office. He left Emery her own access code to the elevator. He even brought in a therapist, Dr. Camille Parker, who specialized in trauma cases. Not for Emery, not at first. She's here to help Joni, Grant said. But Emery saw the truth. The offer was open. Dr. Parker started sitting in the living room on Tuesdays and Fridays, drawing pictures with Joni, sipping tea, and talking in a way that didn't feel like a test. Eventually, Emery began lingering longer, just close enough to hear, just long enough to consider. One night, Emery wandered into the kitchen past midnight. Grant was still up on his laptop, glasses low on his nose, an untouched glass of water beside him. She hovered. He looked up. "Can't sleep. I keep hearing my mom." He set his laptop aside. "In dreams. No, in my head. She says things she used to say, like I need to check the rent envelope or fix the pilot light." Grant nodded slowly. "I used to hear mine too, mostly when I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. I'm afraid if I stop worrying, everything will fall apart. Maybe it's not about stopping. Maybe it's about learning to worry with help." She tilted her head. "Is that what adults do?" He chuckled. "The good ones try." She stared at the tiles, then whispered, "I don't know how to stop protecting Joni." He reached across the table. "You don't have to stop. You just don't have to do it alone." And for the first time since she arrived, Emery allowed herself to believe him. Just a little. Enough to sleep that night without checking the locks twice. The knock wasn't loud. It was soft, polite, but something about it cut straight through the morning quiet of Grant's penthouse. He was in the kitchen making oatmeal. Joni was humming under a blanket on the couch. Emery was curled on a stool, still half asleep, her legs tucked underneath her like a cat. Then, knock, knock, not on the door, on the glass. They all turned toward the balcony. Two figures stood there in wool coats and tight smiles. One was a tall man with a clipboard. The other, a woman with tired eyes and a county badge clipped to her collar. Grant's stomach sank. He stepped toward the sliding glass door and opened it an inch. "Can I help you?" The man spoke first. "Grant Ellison." "Yes. I'm Case Officer David Langston. This is my colleague, Miss Rivera. We received a report concerning the temporary placement of two minors, Emery and Joni Vega. May we come in?" Grant hesitated. Behind him, Emery stood, frozen, her eyes locked on the clipboard. The woman, Rivera, softened her voice. "We're not here to frighten anyone. We just need to ensure the children are safe and properly placed. May we?" Grant stepped aside. They entered with practiced calm. No sudden movements, no raised voices. But to Emery, their presence was louder than sirens. "Mausch." They sat around the glass dining table. Emery held Joni's hand tightly under the surface. Grant sat beside them, his expression unreadable. Langston flipped through a file. The girl's mother, Sabrina Vega, is currently under hospital care, listed as temporarily incapacitated. There is no official guardian on file. Rivera added, "We were told the girls have been staying here under Mr. Ellison's supervision. Is that correct?" Emery's voice barely rose above a whisper. Yes. Langston turned to Grant. Can you tell us the nature of your relationship to the family? Grant kept his voice calm. I own the warehouse where Emery and Joni were found working. I became aware of their situation and offered temporary housing while their mother receives medical care. Rivera's brow furrowed. Do you have legal custody or temporary guardianship? No. Langston clicked his pen. Mr. Ellison, we appreciate your concern, but without formal guardianship or family ties, the state is required to intervene in the children's living arrangements. Joni let out a small, terrified squeak. Emery squeezed her hand tighter. No, she said quietly. Rivera looked at her gently. Sweetheart, we know this is scary. No. Emery said louder, her voice shaken but firm. We're not going to another place. Langston turned to Grant. Unless legal steps are taken, they cannot remain here beyond today. It's a matter of liability and state regulation. Grant's jaw tightened. You're telling me that after doing nothing for years, now that someone's finally helping, you're going to rip them away? Rivera didn't flinch. We're telling you, the law isn't built for private rescue missions. It's built for structure, stability. That's what they have here. Not on paper. The words echoed in the room. After the officers left with a promise to return in 48 hours, unless formal arrangements were filed, Emery retreated to the guest room. She locked the door. Grant stood in the hallway, hand hovering near the doorknob. He didn't knock. He just spoke, quietly. You didn't do anything wrong. No response. He exhaled. I've seen kids fall through systems, Emery, and I know what it feels like when you do everything right and still feel like a number. But I won't let that happen. Not to you. Not to Joni. Still silence. Until... I hate how scared she looked. His heart clenched. She didn't understand what they meant. But I did. I knew. Her voice cracked. I told her this place was different. Grant pressed his forehead gently to the door. It still can be. Hidako. That night, he met with his lawyer, Marcy Quinn, a fierce, direct woman with eyes like polished steel. You want emergency guardianship over 2 minors? She asked, scanning the file. Yes. Do you have familial ties? No. Have they lived with you for longer than 30 days? No. Do you have written consent from the mother? He paused. She's still under care. She hasn't been able to. Then we have a problem. Grant's jaw clenched. I can pay. I can sponsor every medical bill. Secure every education guarantee. File every form. This isn't about money, Grant. It's about optics. The state doesn't like rich men with no relation taking in underage girls. Even if your intentions are gold-plated. His fists clenched. Marcy softened. Just slightly, but I have an idea. She flipped a document from the folder. There's something called intent to kinship placement. It's rare and risky, but if Sabrina Vega names you as her children's emergency custodian, and if you pass a home inspection, background check, and psychological evaluation, we might have leverage to stall intervention. Grant leaned in. Do it. I'll draw it up. As she packed her bag, she hesitated. You're not doing this to feel better about your past, are you? He met her eyes. No, because these girls, they aren't a redemption story. They're kids, and kids break things. They wake you up at 3 a.m., and they make you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. Grant's voice was soft. I don't want to save them, Marcy. I want them to have a life they don't have to survive every second of. She paused, then nodded. That's the only right answer. The hospital smelled like bleach and grief. It was the same scent Grant remembered from childhood visits with his mother, air too clean, fluorescent lights too bright. the weight of waiting pressing down like an invisible hand. He walked slowly down the corridor until he reached room 313. The nurse outside the door glanced up. "You're here for Sabrina Vega." Yes, I was approved. She's awake, but not fully lucid. There's some disorientation, depression, maybe more. The doctor's running a psych eval. Grant nodded and pushed the door open gently. Sabrina was thinner than he remembered from the old employee photos. Her once rich brown hair had grayed at the roots, pulled back sloppily into a bun. Her face was pale, gaunt around the cheeks, but her eyes deep, sharp. Weary followed him the second he entered. She didn't speak right away. Grant moved to the chair beside her bed and sat without ceremony. "You're the man who found my daughters," she said hoarsely. "I am." Her lips curled, just slightly. "I used to sew cuffs for your suits. Midtown garment. I was fast. You probably never noticed." "I didn't," he admitted. "And I should have." Sabrina turned her face toward the ceiling. People notice different things depending on which floor they're on. Grant didn't argue. There was nothing to say. After a moment, he pulled a thin folder from his coat. "I came to ask your permission." "For what?" He opened it. Papers, pre-filled, signed by his lawyer. "To act as temporary guardian for Emery and Joni, just until you're well." "Just to give them time?" Sabrina's eyes filled slowly. Tears she didn't try to blink away. "I failed them," she whispered. "No," Grant said. "You got them this far. That's not failure. That's survival. But I made her be me." Her voice cracked. "I made Emery become someone she wasn't ready to be. She missed everything. She stopped being a child. She was parenting Joni while I couldn't get out of bed, while I kept sewing pieces of a past that wasn't coming back." Grant's voice softened. "You were sick, and the world made it too expensive to get help." Sabrina turned her head toward him, eyes piercing. "Don't make me a symbol. I'm not here to inspire anyone. I'm just a tired woman who couldn't carry it all." Grant nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm not here to rewrite your story, just to keep it from ending too soon." Sabrina reached for the pen slowly. Her hand trembled as she signed, and just like that, the door stayed open. Back at the penthouse, Emery stood on the balcony, arms folded tightly across her chest. The city stretched before her, glittering and unaware. When Grant stepped out beside her, she didn't turn. "You saw her?" He nodded. "She signed the papers. I knew she would." "You okay?" "No." He waited. She exhaled shakily. "When I was 9, she didn't come home for 3 days. No call, no note, just gone. I thought she'd died. I made toast for Joni using a coat hanger because I didn't know how the stove worked." Grant said nothing. "Just let her speak." "I used to listen at the door for footsteps. Every time I heard boots on the porch, I'd think it was CPS, or someone come to take Joni away, and I'd run. I'd hide her in the closet with snacks and whisper, 'Stay quiet,' like we were in a war movie." Tears threatened, but she blinked them away. "I never told her that, never told anyone, because if I said it out loud, it would make it real." She looked up at him. "But it was real." Grant nodded slowly. "And it wasn't your fault. She's still my mom. You can love someone and still name the damage." They stood in silence. Eventually, Emery whispered, "Do you think people like us ever stop holding our breath?" He answered gently, "Not until someone shows us how." Hearings. That night, Emery asked to sit in on Joni's therapy session. Dr. Camille Parker welcomed her with a warm smile and a small wave to the floor cushions near the window. Joni was halfway through describing a dream involving flying cereal boxes and a talking goat when Emery interrupted, softly. "Do you remember when the roof leaked last winter?" Joni paused. "The time with the buckets." "Yeah, I remember you saying it was like a waterfall. We pretended it was a jungle. Emery nodded, her voice tight. I was scared that day. I didn't tell you, but I thought the ceiling would fall. Joni tilted her head. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to feel safe. Joni smiled gently. You made it feel safe, even if it wasn't. Emery's throat closed. Doctor. Parker said nothing, only gave her the space. And for the first time, Emery let go of the silence she'd carried like armor. Dacos? Later, after Joni had gone to bed and the lights had dimmed, Grant found Emery at the kitchen island, absent-mindedly stirring a spoon through an untouched cup of tea. You didn't have to do any of this, she said softly. I know, but you did. Grant met her gaze. I wasn't there when I should have been, a long time ago, for someone who looked a lot like you. She frowned. My mom, he said. We lost our house when I was 12. No one helped her. She drowned quietly. I swore I'd never let myself need anyone after that. He paused. And maybe that's the mistake I'm trying to correct now. Not with pity, but with presence, Emery whispered. That's a heavy kind of hope. He smiled faintly. The best kind usually is. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:00. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made Joni stop coloring mid-stroke and made Emery's stomach drop. Grant met the officials at the door with his usual quiet authority. His shirt was ironed, his voice calm, but even he couldn't hide the tension behind his eyes. 2 agents stepped in, one with a clipboard, the other with a camera. Not the kind you saw on television, the kind that documented carpets, pantries, toothbrushes, and night lights. The home study had begun. Joni sat stiffly on the couch, legs swinging nervously. Emery stood beside her, trying not to look afraid. But she was, because this was the part no one ever saw in those happy adoption videos online. This was the measuring, the evaluating, the silent comparison of lives and standards. They asked questions about routine, discipline, food prep, school enrollment. How long have the children been here? Where do they sleep? Has Mr. Ellison ever raised a minor before? Do you own firearms? Have there been any incidents of physical contact? Even discipline-related? Emery bristled at that last one, but Grant answered every question plainly, never flinching. The woman with the clipboard nodded as she jotted things down. You have a very stable environment here, Mr. Ellison, but placement always favors biological relatives first. If any are found, none exist, Grant said quietly. I had that confirmed. Still, we're required to check. She paused. Also, there's been some press. Grant's posture changed, slightly sharpened. What kind of press? The man with the camera pulled out a folded sheet of paper from his coat pocket and handed it over. It was a printout of a news article. Headline bold at the top. Millionaire CEO, harboring minors in penthouse raises. Questions about guardianship ethics. Grant didn't move. Emery stood on her toes to glance at the photo. It was of their building, blurred, taken from the street, but unmistakable. The article cited anonymous sources, and one very familiar name at the bottom, Carolyn Dobbins. Later that evening, after the agents had gone, Grant stood alone by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched below in all directions, endless and indifferent. Emery approached quietly, holding a mug of mint tea. They can't take us, right? Grant took the mug, set it down, and turned toward her. They're not supposed to, but people like Carolyn know how to bend supposed to into whatever they want. Emery frowned. Why would she care? We're just us, Grant exhaled. You're standing on land she wants. and you're a story the press wants. Innocent girls. Wealthy man. It doesn't take much to twist truth into suspicion. She said Joni and I were better off somewhere structured. She doesn't know what structure means. She wants to win. He nodded. She always has. Emery stepped closer, her voice low. Then let's not lose. The next morning, the building concierge called up to warn them. A reporter was lingering outside, and not just any reporter. Tessa Monroe, freelancer, known for edgy exposés, the kind of writer who turned whispers into clickbait. She'd emailed Grant earlier that day, requesting a comment on the optics of unauthorized custodianship. He didn't reply, but someone else did, because when Grant stepped into the kitchen, Marcy Quinn was already seated at the island, iPad open, glasses perched at the tip of her nose. "I saw the piece," she said without looking up, "and I'm filing a cease and desist." "Good, but that won't kill the story. The Dobbins woman has political ties. She's whispering in the right ears, making noise with the wrong motivations. What do we do?" Marcy looked up. "We flip the narrative." Grant narrowed his eyes. "How?" "We let the right journalist tell the real story." He hesitated. "You think the truth matters?" Marcy smiled faintly. "Only when it's told by someone with nothing to gain." She handed him a folder. Inside, a contact, Leah Martinez, former foster child, now an investigative journalist known for long-form, empathy-driven pieces. No cheap headlines, no camera stunts. "She'll want to talk to Emery," Marcy added. "Not you." Grant paused, then nodded. "I'll ask her." That night, Grant approached Emery on the balcony again. It had become her favorite place, a quiet overlook she could claim without having to explain herself. "I want to ask you something," he said gently. She raised an eyebrow. "There's a journalist. Her name is Leah Martinez. She grew up in the system. She writes real stories. No spin. Marcy thinks she might help. You want me to talk to a stranger. Only if you want to. No pressure. But people are already talking. It might be better if someone actually listens." Emery leaned on the railing, eyes on the skyline. "Everyone who ever came to our door with a notepad wanted to take something. I know she won't be different. She might be." A long pause. Then, "If I do it, I want Joni there." Grant smiled faintly. "Of course." When Leah arrived 2 days later, she wore jeans, a thrifted pea coat, and a notebook with visible wear on the spine. She didn't take out her phone, didn't record anything. She just sat on the floor with Emery and Joni on their terms, their space, and said, "Tell me what the world keeps getting wrong." And for the first time, someone listened. The article dropped on a Sunday. No headlines in all caps. No tabloid scandal. Just a quiet, powerful title above a black and white photo of Emery and Joni sitting cross-legged on Grant's living room rug. "What It Takes to Be Safe" by Leah Martinez. It spread like a spark, not because of virality, but because of truth. Because Leah didn't describe the penthouse, the money, the politics. She wrote about the girls, about Emery braiding Joni's hair before school, about the smell of damp wool in the old yellow house, about the sound of the roof cracking in February. She wrote about the soft panic in Emery's voice when asked what being a child had felt like. "I thought being a kid meant pretending you weren't afraid, so the adults could rest." She quoted that directly, and the world listened. Oh. By noon, the inbox at Grant's nonprofit was overflowing. Messages from social workers, from teachers, from mothers who'd lived similar lives, even from former employees of Midtown Garment, who remembered Sabrina as quiet but lightning fast and always covering shifts for others without asking questions. Donations trickled in too. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the shift, because now Carolyn Dobbins was no longer the gatekeeper of the story. She was suddenly part of it, and not in the way she'd planned. 2 days later, a sealed envelope landed on Marcy Quinn's desk. She opened it, read it once, then called Grant with the news. She's suing. Grant didn't blink. For what? Defamation, loss of business, reputational damage, standard threats when someone powerful feels the story slipping from their control. Will it hold? Marcy smirked. Not if what I just uncovered is admissible. She tapped her keyboard, pulled up a scanned PDF. Carolyn's construction firm has been using underage labor subcontracted through a third-party textile vendor. Same one tied to Midtown Garment. Grant's jaw set. You're sure? Positive. I've got shipping manifests, and get this. She lobbied to close down city-run shelters near the East Side warehouse 2 years ago. Guess which building replaced one of them? He sat down heavily. The yellow house. Marcy nodded. She built a ghost development, drove rent up, then bought out the block. Grant's voice was low. She didn't just fail those kids. She created the conditions that trapped them. Exactly. Which makes this a whole new game. Later that week, the family court hearing was scheduled not for custody finalization yet, but to determine the immediate safety of Joni and Emery under Grant's care. Sabrina was still recovering, stable but emotionally delicate. So Emery was asked if she wanted to speak. At first, she said no. Then, quietly, just before the hearing, she changed her mind. I want to tell them what Joni won't say, she said. What I was never allowed to say. Our. The courtroom wasn't as big as she imagined. No wooden pews, no grand gallery, just 3 rows of chairs. A judge who looked like someone's grandmother, a clerk with pink post-its on everything. Emery sat beside Marcy, who gently reminded her, you don't have to be eloquent, just be honest. When the judge finally turned to her and said, Miss Vega, do you wish to make a statement? Emery's hands shook, but her voice didn't. She stood, walked slowly to the center rug, faced the judge, and began. My name is Emery Vega. I'm 14. My sister is 8. She paused. Let that sit. For a long time, I didn't know what it meant to be safe. I just thought it meant not screaming when the power went out, or pretending cold water was a game, or eating rice 3 days in a row without complaining. The courtroom was silent. I thought being a good sister meant never crying, never asking for help, because if I did, it might make us seem ungrateful, and then someone would come and take Joni. She glanced down, then back up. We don't want to be a headline. We don't want to be anyone's tragedy story. She looked straight at the judge. We just want to wake up and know we're okay. That we don't have to jump every time someone knocks. That Joni can keep her stuffed dog. That we can make toast without checking the ceiling. Her voice cracked just once. Mr. Ellison didn't give us a castle. He gave us quiet. And that's what safety feels like now. Quiet. And warm floors. And a fridge with juice. A pause. And no one looking at us like we're broken. The judge blinked slowly, then nodded. Thank you, Miss Vega. And just like that, the words she'd never said out loud became part of the official record. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Leah was there too, standing off to the side. She didn't hold a mic, just a small notepad. And when Emery stepped out, she gave a small, respectful smile. You were brave in there. Emery shrugged. I was just honest. Those are the same thing. Most days, Grant joined them a moment later. He didn't say anything, just handed Emery a small slip of folded paper. On it, in his tidy print, You don't have to protect the world alone anymore. It's okay to let the world protect you too." She didn't cry. She just folded the note and tucked it into her pocket, like something worth keeping. The first time Sabrina saw her daughters outside of a hospital room, she broke. It wasn't loud. There were no dramatic tears or sobs. She just stopped walking when she saw them in the park, Joni on the swing, Emery gently pushing, the wind pulling at their sleeves. Sabrina gripped the metal railing near the gate and whispered, "I don't know if I belong in that picture anymore." Grant stood beside her. He'd offered to drive her to the court-appointed visit, expecting maybe a handshake, a short, clinical exchange. He hadn't expected this pause, this raw honesty, from a woman who had spent her life biting down on her pain. "You're still their mother," he said. Her jaw clenched. "But I wasn't their shelter. You were what you could be with what you had." She looked at him. Her eyes were clearer now, less weighed by medication, more open. "You think I should let them stay with you. I think they deserve a life without fear." Sabrina nodded slowly, then helped me figure out how not to lose them completely. Ruana. That evening, Sabrina sat on the penthouse couch, not as a guest, not as a patient. As a mother, Joni crawled right into her lap without hesitation. But Emery hovered unsure. It wasn't distance. It was protection. Like if she forgave too fast, the past might disappear in ways she still needed to understand. "I used to dream I was holding your hand in a crowd," Sabrina said softly. "And every time I looked down, you were gone. But it wasn't you who let go." Emery's eyes filled slowly. "You weren't there. I know. Sometimes I pretended you were sick because it was easier than thinking you just stopped trying." Sabrina didn't flinch. "I was sick, and I also stopped trying. And I'm sorry." They sat in silence. Not the brittle kind. The kind that breaks something open just wide enough for healing to begin. "Oh, what tell?" 2 days later, Sabrina asked for a meeting with Marcy, with Grant, and with the court-appointed guardian. "I want to give up permanent custody," she said. Marcy blinked. "You? What?" "Not because I'm running. Not because I'm unfit, but because I know what I can give them and what I can't." She turned to Grant. "I can't offer steady work, or safe housing, or peace from the systems that swallowed me whole. But you can—" Grant's voice was low. "I'm not their father." "No," she said gently. "But you became their future the moment you refused to look away." The court guardian asked, "Are you certain?" Sabrina nodded. "I'll still be present. I want to call, visit. But they need someone who can build them a life, not someone always trying to escape her own." It was one of the bravest things anyone had ever said in that room, and no one challenged it. Later that night, Grant sat on the balcony with Emery. The sky was bruised purple, stars pushing through the haze. She hadn't spoken since the decision. "Finally," she said. "You didn't ask for this." He shook his head. "No, you could still say no." He looked at her. "Is that what you want?" "No," she whispered. "I just want to know you won't leave." "I won't." She hesitated. "What if Joni wakes up in 10 years and wants a real dad? Then I'll remind her that real doesn't mean biological. And what if I mess it up? What if I don't ever stop flinching when people knock? Then we figure it out together." She looked at him for a long time, then said, very softly, "Okay." It wasn't consent. It was trust, the kind that takes months to grow and seconds to shatter. And Grant held it like it was glass in his hands. The legal process began quietly. Sabrina signed permanent guardianship transfer papers, with full visitation rights and a future clause to revisit adoption. If ever desired, Joni didn't understand all the terms. But she understood one thing. I get to stay with M, and M gets to stay with you. That was enough. Leah Martinez, the journalist, reached out again. "I won't write more unless you ask me to," she said over the phone. "But people are asking what happened." Emery answered for them all. "You can tell them we stopped surviving and started choosing." A week later, Grant received a message from someone unexpected. Marcus Avery, one of the city's largest commercial developers and the same man who once supported Carolyn Dobbins's warehouse projects. He asked for a lunch meeting. When they met, Grant was cautious, reserved, but Marcus leaned in and said, "I saw the article, the real one, and I've seen enough of this industry to know when someone's doing the right thing. What do you want?" "To invest," Marcus said. "Not in you, in the girls, in whatever nonprofit you're building out of this." Grant paused. "Why now?" "Because I have a granddaughter, and if she were ever in danger, I'd want someone like you at the door." That night, Grant walked into the guest room where Joni had fallen asleep mid-story. Crayon in hand, he tucked the blanket around her, turned off the light, then went to the hallway where Emery leaned against the wall. "Waiting," she asked. "What if we call this place home?" Grant smiled. "I already do." 3 months later, the yellow house was back in the headlines, but this time, not for what had been lost inside it, for what it was about to become. Standing on the sidewalk, Emery looked up at the structure-chipped paint, sagging porch, and rusted lock still clinging to the front gate. But above it now hung a fresh white banner, Vega House, a shelter for girls who fell through the cracks. The name had been her idea. Grant hadn't even argued. He just listened, nodded, and made the calls. It wasn't a shelter in the traditional sense. It wasn't fluorescent lights and metal beds. It was warmth, quiet, small rooms with hand-sewn quilts and second-hand books that smelled like childhood. Joni helped choose the paint colors. She picked a warm lavender for the hallways and sky blue for the bedrooms. "I want it to feel like daydreams," she said with a grin. No one corrected her. The one day, on opening day, reporters came, but they didn't ask invasive questions this time. They listened. Leah Martinez returned not as a journalist, but as an MC for the ribbon cutting. She held the mic only once to say, "This isn't a rescue story. It's a rebuild story, and that takes longer, but it lasts." Then she handed the mic to Emery. At first, Emery didn't step forward. Then Grant gently nodded. "You don't have to be ready. You just have to be real." So she walked to the podium, took a breath, and said, "I lived in this house, but I didn't sleep here. I survived here." Murmurs quieted. "I used to count raindrops in the ceiling cracks at night and name each one after a worry I couldn't say out loud. I'd hide Joni in the closet when things got loud, and we'd make up stories about castles made of rice and beans." She paused. "But what I know now is that survival shouldn't be a childhood. So this house, Vega House, is for the girls who are too tired to be brave, for the ones holding up the sky while no one's looking." Her voice didn't crack. It rang, clear, steady, like someone who had finally reclaimed her name. In the months that followed, the city council voted unanimously to revoke 3 of Carolyn Dobbins' permits. An anonymous whistleblower, who wasn't so anonymous to Marcy, had leaked employment records confirming the underage labor pipeline. Dobbins' legal team filed appeals, but she was never seen publicly again. In her place rose new partnerships, Marcus Avery's firm backing ethical development, nonprofits extending outreach, and new grant programs named after overlooked former employees of Midtown Garment. One was named after Sabrina Vega. She didn't vanish. Emery had insisted. She gave everything she had until it broke her. That deserves remembering, and so it was. Oh, Stowe, at home, life didn't become perfect. Joni still had nightmares sometimes. Emery still flinched at the sound of certain sirens. Grant still kept a list in his drawer of every child whose name had crossed his lawyer's desk, the ones he couldn't help. Not yet, but life grew. One morning, Joni left a crayon drawing on the fridge. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a house with a yellow door. The caption, in wobbly handwriting, "We live in a real story now." And none of them corrected her, because she was right. On the anniversary of the warehouse discovery, Grant stood alone on the now empty lot. Just concrete, faded lines, still wind. He bent down and placed a single object on the ground, a silver thimble. It had belonged to Sabrina. He'd found out, from her first job, when she was just 15, he'd kept it in his desk drawer, as a reminder, not of what was lost, but of what had been stitched together slowly, painfully, beautifully by people who weren't supposed to win, but did anyway, because they never stopped loving forward. In a world that too often looks away, one man refused to, from a single thimble in a broken warehouse, to a yellow-doored home where girls could dream again. This story wasn't just about rescue. It was about rebuilding, about the strength of a mother who chose love over pride, about a girl who found her voice in a courtroom that finally listened, and about the silent cost of systems that let children fall through the cracks simply because they were born into poverty or into the wrong zip code. This is what happens when power is used to heal, not to hurt. But let's be honest. How many other warehouses still exist behind polished city facades? How many little girls are still sewing in silence, unseen? Every like, every share, every comment helps spread not just this story, but this message. Children are never disposable, and dignity should never depend on wealth. If this story moved, you don't let it stop here. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and awaken. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is listen, and then act.